Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning today. I want to talk about the Tampa Bay Lightning because they are sitting precariously close to that playoff line. Now, they've had some good runs and some bad runs this year. Maybe they're due for another good run. Their upcoming schedule is not that daunting. It's not that easy either, but it's not that daunting necessarily. But coming out of this, we may have a better idea for where this team's headed for the March 8th deadline because it's an interesting one. If you're Julian Brisebois, are you looking to add? Are you looking and saying, you know what, we can take another run at this? Are you looking to stand pat? Are you looking at maybe selling off a couple of assets? So for Tampa Bay, where they're at right now is not usual for them. Last year they were 37-17-4 at this point. The previous season 37-15-6. They weren't close to the playoff line. There was never any concern. In fact, last year at this time, the concern was we already knew Toronto and Tampa Bay were going to meet in the first round, and it was kind of boring. The results were kind of boring because we knew exactly who was going to play against each other. Right now, we could be getting into a position where we know Toronto and Boston could end up playing each other, or Toronto and Florida, or Florida and Boston. Again, we'll see. But it does feel a lot less predictable and boring right now than it did last year. But if you're a Tampa Bay fan, that may not be great news because, again, they're the number 2 wild card. Since the All-Star break, they lost the first 2, then they won 3 in a row, and now they've lost 3 in a row. So they've been inconsistent. And last night's game against Washington, it's another one that, yeah, maybe they could have won and should have won, different circumstances, but certain parts of the team letting them down. Now, one can point at the fact Sergachev's been injured a lot of the year. I don't know that it necessarily means that much of a difference in the record. Maybe they'd be better if Sergachev was in the lineup a little more often. Yes. They also have Chernak listed as day-to-day. Hayden Fleury's listed as day-to-day. Jeannot is currently on the IR. But this is not a team dealing with a ton of injuries. They don't have anybody of the major star variety, unless you consider Sergachev to be a major star, and who would I be to argue with you if he did? But they don't have anybody really key other than Sergachev missing. So Kucherov, of course, right now looks like he could end up winning the Hart Trophy. 36 goals, 59 assists, 95 points in 57 games. However, if they miss the playoffs, that could probably leave a lot of people voting for McKinnon and saying, well, Colorado's in the playoffs, so clearly the better MVP right now would be Nathan McKinnon. And again, I'm just throwing that out there. That could be one of the arguments. Now, the second leader in points is Braden Point. 58 games, 28 goals, 31 assists, 59 points. Respectable numbers, down from where they were last year, especially on the goal scoring front. Brandon Hagel, 21 goals, 33 assists, 54 points in 58 games. Very good numbers from Hagel, justifying his contract at this point. Hedman has had a really good bounce back year from last year. He has 9 goals, 45 assists, 54 points in 56 games. So the problem's not there. There's some depth issues, and I think the depth issues are due to the fact that the salary cap has really kind of pruned their talent when it comes to the depth, right? That whole third line gone after that last Stanley Cup win. Stamkos in 55 games has 23 goals, 27 assists, 50 points. Stamkos is playing well. He's also 34. So with Stamkos, and he heads up their pending UFA list, what do you do? He's made it clear he doesn't want to talk contract right now. The team's made it clear they want to keep him. They'd like to have him retire as a member of the Lightning. But if you made him available at a trade deadline where there's not a lot of big names that are available at this year's trade deadline, let's be honest, if the Lightning came out and made him available, they're going to get some calls. There are going to be some teams who say, no, I wouldn't mind adding Stamkos for a Stanley Cup playoff run, sure. And then Tampa Bay could turn around and re-sign him July the 1st, right? So for Stamkos, this is a really interesting time, and for the Lightning, it's an interesting time too, because I didn't think I'd see the day Stamkos would even potentially be on his way out of Tampa, but the fact that we haven't got the extension yet, and we've got the trade deadline in a couple weeks, there's at least the chance that he ends up being moved. Now, Cirelli, 57 games, 12 goals, 19 assists, 31 points, has been more productive lately than he was at the start of the year. I think he has 10 points in their last 10 games. Nick Paul, 15 goals, 15 assists, 30 points in 58 games. Productive forward for them as well. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. Looking at their cap space, they have $6.775 million, kind of. Remember, Sergachev's on LTIR. That's $8.5 million there. So they kind of have the cap space, but they really kind of don't. And they'd rather have Sergachev back, believe you me, because they're sitting right now in a wild card spot. They're 5 points clear of Washington, New Jersey, and the Islanders, but all those teams have games in hand. So do Pittsburgh, who are 7 points back. So it's not doing Tampa Bay any favors to artificially hold Sergachev on long-term injured reserve if they miss the playoffs. That totally defeats the purpose of that whole, the LTIR loophole. So their pending UFA list, again, fascinating. You've got Stamkos, you've got Mott, Watson, DeHaan, and Fleury. So a couple of depth defensemen in DeHaan and Fleury. Mott and Wilson depth forward, or Mott and Watson depth forwards. No idea why I'm trying to put Tom Wilson here, but we'll see. But yeah, Tampa Bay. The interesting thing to me too with them, it's not just the Stamkos question. The fact he's not the dynamic forward right now that he was a couple of years back, and that can return. But as the guy gets older and older, the likelihood drops. But Vasilevsky hasn't looked like Vasilevsky since returning. He has a 19-14 record. His .896 save percentage. Question can be asked of whether or not Vasilevsky's 100%. Maybe the defense is allowing far too many high danger chances against. But his quality start number, which is 51.5%, that's 51.5% of the time that he starts a game, he provides you with a save percentage of 900 or greater. That feels low for Vasilevsky. Still one of the best goalies in the league, I believe, but the numbers don't back that up this year. The goals for per game. So this is where goal support shows up. Goals for average, Vasilevsky gets 3.48 goals scored per game. Goals against per game, 2.98 when he starts. Johansson has a record of 10-7-5. His save percentage, .886. His quality starts, 40.9%, which is low for an NHL goalie. Goals for average, 3.1. So this is where it's interesting. And I could do a look around the league at some goalies that are getting really good goal support and some that aren't, because it's really fascinating to look at how it's different per team. But 3.1, that's a .38 difference right there. Goals against average, 3.54, so they allow half a goal more when Johansson's in net. They score about a third a goal less per game. So those are rough numbers. Tompkins only played, a few starts. He had a 1-2 record, .889 save percentage. Did not have a 900 plus save percentage in any of those games. They averaged 3.06 goals per game when he started, 3.4 goals against when he started. So the goals against was a little bit lower than it's been under Johansson. But it is interesting to look at the goaltending numbers. A team in Tampa Bay that basically it's been Vasilevsky and whoever's the backup, it doesn't matter. But this year it's been a little different. Vasilevsky was injured the first couple months of the season. And it's felt like Tampa Bay hasn't had a chance to really be the Tampa Bay Lightning of old this season. So looking at their scoring per period, the first period, it's a positive 5. They're plus 5, 60 goals scored, 55 goals allowed. Second period, they've scored 59, they've allowed 67. So bit of a harder time with the long change. Third period, they've scored 73, they've allowed 71. Allowing 71, probably a little bit high. They've scored 4 in overtime, they've allowed 5 in overtime. So the question really with this team becomes one of, so again, that whole window conversation, right? 2019, they lost in the first round, famously against Columbus. 2020 and 2021, they won the Stanley Cup. I know people are going to jump in with illegitimate cup this and illegitimate cup that, but they had to beat 4 teams to win those Stanley Cups, so it wasn't any easier for them than it was for anybody else. They lost the Stanley Cup final in 2022, and of course last year they lost in the first round. And when they lost in the first round against Toronto, there were a lot of reasons for that. This team's tired. They've had a lot of long Stanley Cup playoff runs. They'll be fine next year. And it sounded very similar to back in 2017 when Chicago lost in the first round. Very similar things. A lot of playoff runs. It happens. They'll be back next year. They'll be really good. And it didn't happen. So I don't know if Tampa Bay, if we might be looking at a situation where in the next couple years, maybe they go from being a number 2 wild card to being just below the playoff line and then the slow descent from there. So their upcoming schedule it's not daunting, but it's not easy either. So on the weekend, so coming up tomorrow and Sunday, they're against the New York Islanders. That's a road game. And then they're in New Jersey the day after that. The Islanders and New Jersey are 2 of the teams that are 5 points back with games in hand. If Tampa Bay loses both of those games, that to me officially signals they're in trouble. If they win both of those games, well, all of a sudden they'll have a bigger lead over both New Jersey and the Islanders. They would have to worry about the Caps, not that they play the Caps coming up. And then there's Philly right here. Philly could be key too, because Philadelphia, there's an expectation of them at some point falling off. So they're at Philadelphia on Tuesday. That ends that 3-game road trip. And then March the 9th, they're at home against Philly as well. So those are 4 points right there that if they can get against Philly, maybe they push Philly out of a playoff spot, and one of the teams they're worried about that's behind them ends up being ahead of them technically, but it's not a big deal because they pushed Philly out of the playoffs. They have a game against Buffalo to start their homestand on February 29th. Then March the 2nd, they're at home against Montreal. Those are very winnable games. So if they can get through these first 3 games, that road trip, with, say, a 2-1 record or 3-0, again, they're in pretty good shape. And then they've got Buffalo and Montreal here. Then they're at home against Calgary. All these teams are below the playoff line, with the exception of Philly, who bookend this here. Philly is part of that homestand on March the 9th. And then March 14th, they're at home against the New York Rangers. So there's some days off there, which is important for an NHL team. And there's some breaks, which you need. So not just the days off, but the breaks too. So because sometimes days off involve, skates and practices and all the fun stuff that maybe some players don't necessarily appreciate as much as others. But this feels like a really key upcoming time. Because again, this schedule is not overly difficult, but there's a lot of teams fighting for playoff spots. The Islanders, the Devils should bring their best. Philadelphia makes you work for it. Calgary's played pretty well lately, and of course you've got the Rangers down here who are legitimately a contender and won't mind knocking Tampa Bay out of the playoffs if that's what it takes. And once you get to March 14th, we should have a really good idea of who's in or out of the playoffs. Other than that dogfight for those final positions. Not a spot Tampa Bay, I think, wanted to be in when the season started. They wanted to be one of the top 3. Florida, Boston, and Toronto being those top 3 right now. So, there's still the chance that Tampa Bay goes on a bit of a run here. Maybe Toronto has a bit of a struggle after all their wins. They had 6 wins in a row, I believe. But, it is definitely turning into a situation where it looks like Tampa Bay's window is closed. Or closing. Maybe it gets pried open. Maybe they win all of these games I got on the board, and all of a sudden, a few weeks from now, we're talking about, hey, this team could still win a cup. So, the question I have for people watching this video is, can the Tampa Bay Lightning win another Stanley Cup? Should they look at selling Stamkos, as crazy as that sounds? But if they don't think they can sign him past this season, is it really that crazy to look at moving an asset if you don't think you're winning the Stanley Cup this year? Again, with the idea that they can re-sign him July the 1st if they so choose. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.